History Committee. During the centennial year, we did a History Minute. We're going to do an 8-minute presentation once a month. So without further ado, Sam, if you would please provide us with our history moment, please.
Thank you, Jonathan. The 1950s was the pivotal time after the Depression and World War II to revitalize our communities. The members of the Kiwanis Club of Olympia were indefatigable as they enthusiastically and capably made a difference in our community. It is a measure of these people that after sacrificing so much during the Depression and World War II, that they were so generous with their time, their talents, their brain power, and their money. Rather than, quote, "it's time for me to get mine," unquote, they focused on making the broader community a good place to raise a family with a quality environment. The Kiwanians of the 1950s were remarkable for their selflessness, generosity, and heartfelt caring for their community. It truly was America's greatest generation. The commitment to the club is evidenced by an unbelievable 91% perfect attendance. The club helped make Olympia a family-friendly community that cared for the needy, as well as recognizing the successful. Their work with Olympia high school students was generous and productive. It is impossible to measure the impact they had on many young lives. How many of those lives were changed for the better. In its first 3 decades, the Kiwanis Club of Olympia could be characterized as a group of establishmentarian business and professional leaders primarily focused on civic betterment. Responsive to the immense transformations in America and Olympia in the 50s, the club changed its focus and its style. For one thing, they had fun. The meetings commenced with boisterous singing. Members were fined a dime for plugging their business or not wearing a pin. There was ubiquitous laughter as the veterans' humor dominated the meetings with practical jokes, swapping humorous stories, and good-natured ribbing. They enjoyed their meetings in the 1950s. Fundraising changed significantly also. Rather than just hitting up the business community for big bucks, they became more family-oriented and community-oriented. The Olympia Kiwanians flipped pancakes. They hawked peanuts at the pet parade and at the Lake Fair parade. Had fun-filled white elephant sales, even had gumball machines and sold, believe it or not, fruitcakes. Rather than big projects for the city, the hospital and the park system, the club appropriately changed to focus on families and youth. Examples of this dramatic change include school crossing lighting, the Olympia High School music program, support for Cub Scout packs, underprivileged children, the YMCA youth legislature, college and vocational guidance for OHS, OHS scholarships for college, camp fees for needy children, and much more. It's impressive to note that the 100 plus size of club membership, same as ours today, while they had a population of Olympia of a mere 16,000 and Thurston County of 35,000. The club presidents during that decade were creatures of their time. They accurately reflected the dynamic 1950s. The club was fortunate to have exceptionally strong, capable, and dynamic leadership throughout the decade, including 3 major figures in Olympia history. In 1952, one of the club's most revered stalwarts, Ralph Storman, served as president. He owned and operated Ralph's Thriftway store on Legion Street. An astute businessman, Ralph served on the board of Puget Power and Light and the Capital Savings Bank. This year was exceptionally productive. Since 1952 was an historic election year, the club sponsored Get Out the Vote campaigns. They covered the city with window cards for the vote campaign. They provided every Kiwanis club in the state with a booklet on state government and made it possible for every individual Kiwanian to obtain one. They, like us, they had candidates for local offices come in and speak, quote, state their policies, unquote. They did all the youth projects and community service projects that they started back in 1950. Ralph Stolman even talked the Quaker Oats Company into making the famous Aunt Jemima available for appearance at one of the club's pancake breakfasts. The storm of leadership and generosity helped the club make a huge difference in this community, including Ken Stormans, who so many of us know, who's his son. In 1954, the Olympia Kiwanis Club had one of its most colorful and exuberant presidents in history. Harry Miner was a paratrooper in World War II. He dropped into France and was immediately captured by the Germans, ending up as a prisoner of war. He escaped, and rather than heading back to England or something, he joined the French underground and fought with them until the end of the war. 10 years later, he served as the president, renowned of our club, renowned for his humor and devilishness. He was the manager of the Olympic Theater, which is now the site of the Washington Center of the Performing Arts. When presiding at meetings, he would cleverly work in a plug for movies that they're playing in his theater. While humorously feigning innocence, he was always fined for promoting his business a whole 10 cents. Harry Miner provided quite a spark for the club, enlightening the meetings. In 1955, the club's president was the most renowned art supporter in the Olympia area in the last half of the 20th century. He was Sherm Huffine, secretary for the Olympia Brewing Company, owned by the revered Schmidt family. Married to Clara Schmidt Huffine, he carried on that prominent family's Kiwanis tradition that had begun July 14, 1921, when Adolf Schmidt met with 11 other community leaders to organize the Kiwanis Club of Olympia. Huffine was a consummate gentleman. He quietly provided general support and encouragement for decades to community leaders and organizations. This is particularly true of the arts. He served on the board of the Seattle Opera, Seattle Symphony. Locally, he helped spawn arts organizations, including the Governor's Festival of the Arts, the Olympia Opera Association, Ballet Northwest. Huffine was one of the initial leaders advocating and championing a performance arts center in Olympia. With his interest in the arts, Huffine's presence was characterized by contributions to Olympia High School music program, assisting in the community Christmas display in Sylvester Park, entertaining students, members of the armed forces, and others. He continued to provide support for families and youth. One program was providing booklets on safety for 2,500 grade school children. The 50s decade was transformative for the Kiwanis Club of Olympia, as it was for the nation and the world. World War II veterans provided new energy, fresh ideas, and extraordinary enthusiasm for community service. The club was fortunate to have such remarkable leaders during the decade. They helped to make a change from a traditional get out the checkbook service club focused on community projects to a club focused on hands-on help and support for families and youth. The decade of the 50s set the course for the rest of the 20th century for this premier service club. Thank you. If you want more details, read the chapter of the 1950s in the Centennial book. I had to, of course, cut it down to this. So.
Great. And if you haven't received a copy of your Centennial book that Sam's referring to, let him know and he'll get you one. That's great. Thanks so much, Sam. I really appreciated hearing about the civic engagement of this club back in the day and getting out the vote. Speaking of which, make sure everybody votes for tomorrow. That's real inspiring and gives us some ideas of things to think about as we go forward. So thanks again. We'll look forward to hearing more as that we go forward. And Sam's organizing the history committee. So if folks want to be involved with that, get in touch with them. So let's get on to our program. Today it's going to be introduced, I believe, by Rhonda Larson-Kramer. Rhonda, are you on and able to introduce our guest today?
I am.
Wonderful.
So we've got Julie Ostling, and she is a registered nurse with a bachelor's degree in science in nursing. She has worked for Assured Home Health and Hospice for the past 26 years. As a hospice nurse, Julie has provided end-of-life care and support to patients and their families. And Julie currently acts as a nurse liaison to the community by providing hospice end-of-life education. Hospice has not only touched her life personally, but also she has experienced the benefits of hospice within her own family. Go ahead, Julie.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for allowing me to present to you today. So I just had it figured out. I think I've lived in Washington now the same amount of time that I lived in Michigan. I grew up in Michigan and I honeymooned out here. And believe it or not, we had a flat tire in our rental car right where Highway 101 and I-5 meet up together. And when we got off the highway to just make sure the tire was okay, of course, it was the beautiful Capitol building in the month of June. And I would say it was about a year later that we relocated out here. So amazing how a flat tire can impact your life so much. So thank you, Rhonda. And yeah, so hospice has definitely impacted me, obviously professionally, but also personally as well. And as we start talking, please know I'm pretty casual. So if somebody has questions, maybe please put them in the chat and someone can or get my attention as we are talking, and I'll help to answer it as I go. So yeah, hospice is near and dear to my heart. And I think it's something that in the United States, we're not always so great about talking about death and dying. And so hopefully after this presentation, you will just have learned something. And I expect you guys now to be the advocates so that when somebody says something to you, you'll say, no, I just had a presentation and that's not true. So there's always a lot of misconceptions, I think, about what hospice is and what it isn't. So I'm going to start with a quote by Muhammad Ali that says, "Do not count the days, make the days count." So I really like that. Hospice really was started years and years ago. Dame Cicely Saunders is kind of someone that brought the hospice concept to the United States, as she started in England. And, you know, people have been caring for their loved ones and for the dying for just years and years and years. And Dame Cicely Saunders came over and started what we know as hospice in the East Coast, and was just caring for folks. And it started out as a volunteer program. And in the 80s, it actually became a part of the hospice. It kind of became a part of Medicare. So I'm getting ahead of myself, but it is now a Medicare benefit. So I think that's pretty cool. And really by definition, hospice is a special way of caring for folks that have a life-limiting illness. And according to Medicare, kind of what that says, and I always put this in quotes, is that if the disease kind of goes its usual and normal course, the person may have a prognosis of 6 months or so. And every time I'm meeting with families, I always say, you know, we've had folks on hospice for a day, and we've had folks on hospice for over 2 years. And you're like, well, Julie, how can that be? You just said that we have to have a prognosis of 6 months. Yeah, that's true. But the human, you know, the human body, everybody goes through it a little bit differently. And so the neat thing about it is it can be a service that goes much longer than 6 months. So yeah, I always like to say that we're not predictable, are we, as people? So there's many different types of illnesses that we think of when we think of hospice. I think automatically everyone always thinks cancer, right? But no, it's so much more than that. It's the person that may have cancer and may no longer be receiving treatment, but it also is that person that has lung disease or heart disease or Alzheimer's, AIDS, a myriad of illnesses. And how about those people that I feel like we get a little bit of everything as we age? It's diabetes and heart and lung and all the above. So I think most importantly is just for you guys to take away from this that it's virtually for any illness. If somebody is declining in their health, and if the doctor feels like there's that poor prognosis. I like to say that hospice does not do anything to hasten death, nor does it do anything to prolong life. We are just kind of there to walk that journey with you. So when I first started in my nursing career at Assured Hospice, and we received a referral, I got a call and they said, okay, we're ready for hospice to come give us the shot. Like, what? So I like to make sure that people know that, again, we're just walking that journey with someone. We're not doing anything that's hastening death in any way, nor are we prolonging life. We're just kind of taking it day by day. When I meet with families, one of the things I say pretty early on in my talk is, how is it paid for? Because as I start talking about the benefits, people they start picturing dollar signs in their eyes. Uh-oh, how much is this going to cost me? So I like everyone to know that hospice is paid for under Medicare Part A. So it's actually under the hospital part. And even if somebody has a managed plan or an HMO, under Medicare, it kind of reverts straight to that Medicare. Medicare Part A covers it at 100%. You don't even need a secondary for hospice. It's also covered by Medicaid, and the VA has a great hospice program. And now, because hospice is so well known and well recognized, that most all private insurance programs also have a benefit. So that's the really cool part, is for the most part, the services that I'm going to talk to you about are all paid for at 100%. So that, I think, is pretty good news. How are we doing so far? Do we have any questions so far? Anything in the chat or anything that someone wants to ask me? Okay, I'm just going to keep plugging along unless someone says something. Okay. Okay. What is hospice, right? Like, what do we actually do? So I love to say that hospice care is kind of provided wherever home is. So we have a team of people that come out to you wherever home is. So home might be an individual home. It might be an assisted living community. It might be adult family home. Actually, hospice teams can even go into nursing homes or nursing facilities. So we go wherever home is, which is pretty cool. And we have a team of people, and their whole role is to support the patient and their family unit, just to kind of, like what I said, walk through this journey. So Medicare has certain team members that they say we have to have as part of our hospice team. And so that includes our nurse, that includes a certified nursing assistant, that includes a social worker, chaplain or spiritual counselor, volunteers, bereavement coordinators and counselors, and of course, physicians, nurse practitioners, and always at the center of that is the patient and their family. So they're always a big part of that team. And all of those things that I just named are actually what Medicare requires. So there are a few different hospice agencies actually that serve the Thurston County area. And obviously, because it's Medicare, it's a program that's all over the United States. And so whether you or your loved one are receiving hospice here in the Olympia area, or whether you're receiving services out of state, for the most part, you should have the same similarities. How each agency maybe delivers the care may be a little bit different, but they're always going to have kind of the team members that I just talked about. And actually, in addition to that, a lot of programs now also have what we call comfort therapists. And that might be things like massage therapy or music therapy, Reiki, healing touch. So a lot of different modalities just to help someone feel more comfortable. And though that particular program that I just talked about is not a Medicare covered program, that particular program with comfort therapies tends to be more something that is paid for through fundraising, since it's not currently technically a Medicare benefit. So hospice does not move right in with families. And some families are like, thank goodness. And other folks are like, well, we wouldn't mind having someone here 24/7. So mainly the hospice team, they do what we call intermittent visits. So they go into the home and then maybe they're there for about an hour or so, could be more, could be less, depending on what the patient needs. And then we leave, but we are always on call 24 hours a day. So there's that security for the loved one to say, hey, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm not sure what to do. There's always somebody there that can be talked to and kind of walk through whatever scenario there is. And the whole focus, obviously, with hospice is comfort and symptom management. So we heavily focus on making sure that someone is as comfortable as they can be to live whatever life they have left. What about, I always have people ask me, what about equipment? So believe it or not, on hospice, actually the hospice agency also pays for equipment that somebody might need. So wheelchairs, walkers, commodes, and I'm sorry, you guys, if I get too nursey on you, you'll have to raise your hand and say enough. But hospital beds, any kind of equipment that's really helpful in the home, the hospice agency actually pays for that. And also supplies. So things like underpads, or maybe a Depend product, or lotions, creams, that kind of thing. So it's really cool how Medicare, how they designed it. And one thing that we haven't talked about is, I mentioned when Dame Cicely Saunders first started it in the United States, it was primarily a volunteer program. And so when it became a Medicare benefit in the 80s, they kept a portion of that volunteerism as part of the requirement. So every Medicare certified hospice agency is actually required that about 5% of the care that we provide has to be provided by volunteers. So it's pretty cool that they kept that component. So all of your local hospice agencies have a volunteer program. Some of the volunteers come into the office and might make phone calls. Other volunteers are actually going directly into the homes and maybe just sitting with a patient while their loved one goes to run an errand or does something. So I always think that's pretty cool that they kept in, since it started as all volunteer. I think it's pretty neat that they kept that component of volunteerism in the hospice team. Let's see, I'm trying to think of some questions that I always get when I'm talking to families. And one of the things I always get is how does someone get on hospice, or, how does the whole process get started? And there's a few different ways. I mean, hospice does work under the direction of a physician. So we do have to have a referral, but I would say, goodness, several times a week, it's actually families or patients themselves that are calling me and saying, hey, Julie, I'm really interested in hospice for my loved one because of XYZ. Kind of how do we get this started? And so each hospice agency is more than willing to actually call your doctor to actually get a referral. So usually it either comes from maybe the hospital or a doctor's office, or people can refer themselves, and then the hospice agency just has to get an order from your physician. So because it is so medical and technical, we do need to have that order. But most times if someone is asking for hospice, the physician is more than happy to give that order. I find quite the opposite is true sometimes. Sometimes the doctors they may not bring it up to you as a patient, just because I think doctors are people too, right? And so sometimes they don't want to bring it up. We're all so geared towards health and healing and getting better that sometimes it's still even hard for the medical community to talk about what do we do when someone is continuing to decline despite some of the medical options that are available. So yeah, we still have issues like that where doctors, as soon as the family brings it up, then they're like, oh, thank goodness, and then the doctor will talk about it too. I'm trying to think about some of the misconceptions that I hear the most of, and some of the things we've already addressed. So I hear a lot that hospice care is expensive. So you guys are professionals now, right? You know that hospice is paid for by Medicare and some other insurances. And it covers so much, it covers that equipment, it covers some equipment like supplies. And I guess one of the things that I didn't talk about earlier is the hospice agency also pays for medications that are related to that comfort and providing comfort and symptom management. So the agency also pays for that. And we just can either work with your local pharmacy, or we do also contract with the pharmacy where it can come in the mail. So already you guys are experts, it's not expensive. A lot of times I hear that hospice is a place. So some In some areas, they do have something called a hospice care center, but there is not currently a hospice care center in Thurston, Mason, or Lewis County. The closest hospice care center, I believe, is in the University Place area in Pierce County. And that's typically where a hospice patient might go to an actual building to get symptoms under control, or sometimes within the last few days of life. But as a general rule, there's just, hospice is wherever you are, wherever the patient is. So I always think that's pretty cool. So
Julie,
in
there's a
case
couple-
you hear of that, you might hear that. Yeah, Kitsap County, and then I think there's also something in the Longview area. So, or Vancouver, Longview. So those are kind of the closest ones to our area. But currently our 3 counties, the Mason, Thurston, Lewis, don't have an actual hospice care center. So we do hospice at all the other locations that I talked about. Was there a question about that?
Yeah, well, there's a couple questions in the chat. One was raised by John Halverson, who's got his hand up, about medication too. So I thought it might be a good time to jump in there. John, you want to?
Sure.
How about you unmute yourself there first? There you go.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, very timely. Yesterday, I met with a friend from Arizona who came back to Washington to bury her mom. Mom had ALS, late stage onset. Got to a point where she couldn't speak, eat, basically do anything. But also it affected her mind. And even though she had terrible bed sores, she kept refusing medication. And the doctor had already, prescribed it. It was in the house. And apparently the hospice worker, I don't know if it was a nurse or who it was, but they were official, they were part of the plan. As soon as the mom said no, they didn't administer it. And this greatly troubled my friend. It wasn't happening in her house. So it was another sister that was supposedly doing the care, but obviously was either too frail or whatever, did not do the turning in the bed and doing the things to relieve the pain. So my question was, is that what the practice is? A hospice nurse is not supposed to give any medication if the patient says the word no?
Right, that is a really good question. And I think one of the things is the biggest thing that we look at is the patient's kind of ability to understand what's happening. So if we have somebody that is fully cognizant and is making their own decisions and is aware and alert, we have to honor whatever that person says, because they're kind of in charge of their own selves, and they're able to make those decisions. So where it gets tricky is when you have somebody that has, either like an Alzheimer's diagnosis, or in this case, it sounds like somebody that had ALS, where it could have affected their mind. And so what comes into play there is the capacity of someone. And so usually what happens is we try to find, if anyone has ever worked with anybody that has any kind of dementia, we kind of try to find other ways that we can, we keep kind of trying to redirect and keep offering that in a different way so that we're not causing increased agitation. So I can't speak for that situation exactly, just because I don't have the full story. But sometimes if we have somebody that isn't cognizant and they don't really understand maybe what we're offering, we'll try to approach it in a different way, and we'll go to the person that is the decision maker and just kind of talk through the scenario with them. And if at all possible, we're going to try to make sure that we can make that person comfortable, whether it's reapproaching them in a different way. Sometimes medications can come in a little bit of like a cream or something, where we're, instead of someone that does not have capacity and they don't understand what we're trying to put in their mouth, we can do some other ways. So I can't speak to that exactly, but we definitely are going to work with whoever that decision maker is and just try to find a way that we can help the person be as comfortable as they can be. It's a pretty hard situation for sure, it sounds like.
Yeah, clearly my friend was still in pain, just having buried the mother the day before. So
Yeah.
I've been involved with hospice in Wisconsin, Minnesota, and South Dakota, and it all went well with
Mhm.
relatives and was handled very professionally and very
Mhm.
well in all three of those situations. So it was difficult to do anything but just listen to the person, get it off their chest yesterday.
Boy, that's
But-
exactly right. I feel like so many times, right, we might not know what to say, or even if we're ever with some friends or family that we have that are going through a hospice experience, just the gift of presence and being able to listen is so huge. And you know, one of the things, and I mentioned it when I talked about the team, but I didn't really haven't spoken yet about the importance of it. But one of our team members I mentioned was a grief counselor. And one of the neatest things about the hospice program is that once a loved one or a friend, once the person has died, actually hospice stays a part of their life, of their family member, for a minimum of 13 months for a grief program. And so what I think is so neat about that is some people don't realize that once the patient has died, they think, you know, hospice stops. But in fact, that's a lot of the time when hospice really kicks in as far as for grief support. So we're going to walk those family members through, you know, she may not be the only family member that has you know, things that she's going to keep reliving that. And so that's the whole role of the grief counselors, just to support the loved ones through the next 13 months of their lives, and the first, you know, the anniversaries, the holidays, things like that, and to just walk that journey. We know now that grief doesn't end, but we're just there to kind of walk that journey with them. And so I always think that's a really neat, you know, even for those folks that have only been on hospice for a day, they still have access to that full 13-month support for grief. So I always think that's a really neat part of the program that a lot of people don't know about. So like some people in a nursing home would be like, well, why does my loved one need hospice if they're already in a nursing home where they're getting, you know, care? It's just that added layer of support from the whole team. And then of course, ongoing for grief support if they do die.
I think
So
that
thanks for bringing that up.
I think that addresses one of the other questions in the chat from Dave, who talks about the difference between hospice and palliative care. And I think you just kind of talked about
Yeah.
that.
Boy, hospice and palliative care. In fact, I have a picture on it. I was going to say, I don't know if I'll be able to share it or not, but there's always a question that comes up as far as, you know, we're hearing a lot about palliative care and we hear about hospice, and it's kind of like, how are they the same and how are they different? So I always try to tell, do you want me to try to show that picture if I can find it, or is that, I don't have to, I can just explain it.
It's up to you. You can share if you want to.
Let's see if I have the smarts in order to do it. But while I'm looking for it, I'll kind of try to see if I can just kind of explain it. The first difference between hospice and palliative care is actually the prognosis part. So, you know, we talked about hospice being a prognosis of 6 months or less. And so with palliative care, that can be maybe someone that has a prognosis of a year or greater than 6 months. And so the picture that I'm looking for actually kind of shows, and let's see, I'll just try to see if I can do it. And if I can't do it the first time, I won't keep you.
There it is.
Can you see? So what I try to explain, and sometimes the picture shows it best, is that all of hospice is palliative in nature, but not all palliative care is hospice. So that middle section where you see hospice care, that little circle, everything that we do in hospice is palliative in nature, meaning we're there to promote comfort and symptom management. But you see from the picture, there's that whole part outside of hospice that is palliative care. And that would be for folks that have a prognosis greater than 6 months, or maybe who are doing some more life prolonging kinds of treatment. Maybe they have a surgery coming up. Maybe they're still doing a lot of chemo or radiation or diagnostic testing, things that maybe make it so they're not quite hospice appropriate yet. So I always have to kind of show that picture just because that helps a little bit. And then let's see, there we go. Okay. So I just like that because it can help. And so in our area here, you know, we have at least 4 to 5 different hospice agencies now. And then we're also starting to see a little bit more of the palliative care programs. A lot of the palliative care programs are hospital based. So for example, Providence St. Peter Hospital has an excellent palliative care program. So if you're in the hospital and struggling with certain symptoms, they're probably going to refer you to the inpatient palliative care program. And then once you're discharged back to your home, Providence also does have an outpatient palliative care where you go to them. And then Kaiser, if you're a Kaiser member, they have a form of a palliative care program that they are doing if you just kind of need the palliative care without hospice. So I usually manage to confuse people right about now when we're talking about the differences between the two. If you just look at it, the biggest difference is probably prognosis. So if someone has, 6 months or less, you're thinking more hospice palliative care. And if it's greater than 6 months, you're thinking maybe some of these outpatient programs or the Kaiser program. And Assured is now just in the process of starting a palliative care program, but we're just in the beginning stages of it. So, and I'm guessing you'll probably see some other agencies that will start doing that in the home setting. So I know I've been talking for a while. I'm trying to keep track of time frame. How are we doing and how much more time do we have? And are there other questions?
There are other questions and probably about 10 minutes.
Okay.
If you have that time, we would appreciate it. Sure.
Maybe we
Okay,
could
so-
open it up for questions now.
Well, we've
Sure.
got quite a
Are
few
they're
in
in the thing?
the chat. So Joellen asked, maybe this could be a follow-up. Joellen asked what's the process for volunteering as a non-medical provider and kind of what the commitment is.
Oh yeah.
So that may be something some Kiwanians are interested in. So that's
Yeah, definitely. So all the programs in the area have that volunteer program. And basically you do not have to be a medical person at all. And so the hospice agencies kind of train you about the hospice philosophy of care and kind of what to expect, what you might see at home. And because what the volunteer is doing, they're not really doing anything medical for the most part. They're just sitting there and being present, maybe reading, maybe watching TV, or just kind of chatting with someone. Or for the folks that are in the office, they're doing some business types of things. And so if anyone is interested in volunteering, I would just say to call your local hospice agency, and every hospice has a volunteer coordinator, they call it, and can help kind of walk you through that. I don't think for Assured there's I don't think we have like a specific amount of hours that you're required to volunteer. So, but definitely if any of you are interested, call your local agency and they'll kind of walk you through that. Good question. Thank you.
great. Thank you. And another question from Marla is how does hospice handle homeless folks who are on Medicaid?
Oh yeah. So I used to kind of say, boy, we've taken care of folks where their home is under the bridge, and most hospice agencies. So most times, like we talked about, people will have insurance and it is covered under Medicaid. Sometimes we'll have folks that are not, that maybe don't have any insurance. And so most of the hospice agencies in town will do like a community care. We believe in that hospice philosophy so much. So we're going to figure it out. Maybe initially it'll be, I don't want to say free of charge, but free of charge. We will do that as a community service while our social workers are kind of trying to arrange maybe for some insurance coverage. There are a couple groups in town. I'm probably going to get their names wrong. There's like a Hospice Without Borders, and they have a partnership. They kind of work with some of the homeless community. It definitely works better for hospice if we do have someone that is in a location, simply because we also have to make sure that our hospice team is safe, because as you know, we're kind of sometimes we work with medications that other people could want, and not for the purpose of comfort and symptom management. So we've definitely taken care of the homeless community, and it just kind of is case by case on how we handle it and how we can provide it in a safe way for the individual and with the hospice team members. So they were trying to get there's another name for it that's escaping me right now, but there was a team and there was a home in Olympia actually, where they were trying to support if there was a hospice patient that maybe was homeless, that they would allow them to live in this home. And I would just have to double check and see if that's something that they're still doing. But I do know that there is an outreach in Olympia, something along the lines of almost like a Hospice Without Borders that's kind of helping with homeless folks.
One other volunteer-related question is how is hospice able to meet the demand in our community? Is there an overwhelming need, or do you feel like you have the tools you need to perform your duties?
Well, I think the biggest thing is I think all of us are still kind of recovering from COVID and kind of what that looked like with our volunteer program and just healthcare in general in the communities, and staffing and nursing shortages and all of those things. I will actually say right now that I think that right now hospice in the Thurston County area is probably at the best it's been. I feel like there's right now in the Olympia area, if someone needed hospice, they could pretty much get it within the next 24 hours. So I feel like the turnaround time is really excellent. And I think all of the agencies work really well together. So for example, if there's somebody that needs it today, but if Assured can't do it, I'm going to call Providence or one of the other agencies just to kind of see who can do what. So it's a real focus on patients and their families. And I feel like we're really playing well with others for the sake of the patient. So I feel like we're really doing well as far as access to hospice. And if the question was specific to volunteers, I feel like every agency can always use more volunteers. Always, always, always.
So maybe we've got time for one more question. If maybe just raise your hand if somebody has an additional question. Or jump right in. Okay, well, I think one of the last things in the quote in the chat was from Marla, who said it was really, I could just read it real quick. One of the biggest advantages of hospice for my mom was that she didn't have to be transported to the hospital and go through all the x-rays and emergency care stuff every time she fell at Alzheimer's clinic facility. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I just think that is one of the neatest things about hospice is the real focus of hospice. I know I kind of started this by talking about how we're not always comfortable talking about death, but really the focus of hospice is really more about how you live. It's about how you can live and how you can live whatever days you have left to the highest degree of comfort and quality of life. And so often when somebody is on hospice, yeah, we're trying to make sure that they're comfortable in their own home. So if somebody falls or if there's something going on, we come to you instead of having to go to the hospital. Obviously, if any of you have been in the hospitals lately, it's pretty crazy in the hospital ER settings right now. And so that is a really neat part about hospice is it's just delivered in your own setting and can kind of prevent some of those transports to a hospital setting, just strictly with that comfort on the focus on comfort. I want to say this. So we talked about how it's that prognosis of 6 months or less, right? And so that's 180 days. We still, when I take a look at how many days on average our patients have hospice, I think the average is maybe 80 days. But the most, so for those of you math people, you know, we've got the mean, median, mode. The mode, most people are on hospice like 23 days or less.
Wow.
So that means that, I mean, yes, we can still do hospice for 20 some days, but it's meant to be a full 180-day benefit or more. So I just encourage you guys now as to go out from this and just to say, you know, it's not as scary as what it seems. Some people graduate off of hospice. So let's say someone is on hospice and they don't continue to decline and maybe they even improve, you can graduate off of hospice and it's still there for you in the future. So I just like to tell people that, you know, obviously I believe in it 120%, but it's a great program and offers just a ton of support.
That's great. Hey, Rose, do you want to get your question in here real quick?
I was just going to give a shout out to Assured Health. We had their hospice service and they were amazing. And so I just wanted to say thank you. It was such a blessing for me and my whole family and my mom. So thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much for that. It was our privilege.
Dave, you got one last thing?
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan, and thank you. One of the things I think is most critical, and has been mentioned a little bit already, is a pain management in these final days. And my dad had a lot of pain, and he was in the hospital, and it seemed like it was a difficult measure to lower his pain enough where he was comfortable, yet he was conscious. You know what I mean? So he could communicate, and that seemed to be a really a fine line there, and really difficult to get right. And we had discussions about it among the family and the doctors and so on. And I'm not sure we ever got it right before my dad finally passed away. But could you comment on that a little bit? Because it seems like that's a very important part.
Yep, absolutely. And you just kind of said that $1 million question, or that $1 million process is, how do we manage somebody's pain at the same time of trying to make sure that they're kind of as alert and oriented as they can be? Because sometimes the higher the medications go, sometimes the patient may not be as awake and alert as what, obviously, as family members, we would want them to be awake and alert and 100% out of pain. And so obviously we do our best to achieve that. And sometimes it just, because everyone is so different, it may take some trial and error, so to speak. And I know that we don't want trial and error in the medical system, but because each of us are so different, that's sometimes what it takes. For hospice, like for our folks that are at home, if we run into something where we need to manage pain, actually hospice has a benefit where we can actually have your loved one go to the hospital specifically to get that pain under control in a more controlled setting with doctors and nurses, and then go back home once that level of comfort is achieved. So yeah, I think that is the $1 million goal, what you just said, to kind of have all of that managed. And we definitely work the best that we can to help to achieve that. But it's not always a perfect system, unfortunately. But we definitely do the best that we can with, there's a lot of different medications on the market that we can use now that are pretty neat. And once somebody is on hospice, I still find sometimes in the hospital, before there's a hospice focus, there still can be some reluctancy almost for some pain medications. But with hospice, that kind of goes away.
Thank you, Julie.
Yeah.
Well, thank you,
I
Julie,
know.
from all of us. I mean, that's so important, and we so appreciate your time.
And you can always reach out to us, or I mean, for me, you can always reach out to me. I'm just going to give you a quick phone number because I know we're running low on time.
Yep.
But if you have any questions or need me to connect you to any kind of resources, my cell is 360-515-6890. And what I'll do is I'll put my information in the chat after this. So obviously anyone can reach out to me with questions. And thanks again for allowing me to talk about this with you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rhonda, for bringing this wonderful guest. Thank you to the program committee. We've got a couple minutes left. Does anybody have any announcements they'd like to make? Terry Bergeson.
Just a quick announcement, we're meeting at Mercado's Wednesday at 5 o'clock with the committee that's working on the Caring for Kids. We hope to get up to 7 or 8 people. So we may be out recruiting a couple more people from the membership to help us with the project. But I'm excited that we're going back to St. Martin's. And we're going to try to really create a program that will talk about coming back stronger and building, with all the stuff we've been through, building a stronger world for our young people with their help.
Thanks, Terry.
Thank you, Jonathan. We're going to be in the wine room.
Of course. Where else are you doing? Anybody else? Dave Feeler.
Well, we need to have a shout out for our state's football teams. The Cougars, the Huskies, the Seahawks all had great weekends. How could you not shout out for all those teams? You know, what a wonderful set of games. But also, in case you guys missed it, we were watching the news the other night on the World Series, and the announcer came on to give the score of that particular night's game before it was over, and started with this: the hated Houston Astros. And I had to stop and think, did she just say that on TV? And of course, it was a Seattle station, of course, and the Astros had beat the Mariners in the playoffs before that. So it was just so funny when it came up, that I had to remark on it.
Thanks, Dave. Sam Reed.
WSU Stanford. Stanford beat Notre Dame, one of the higher ranked teams in the nation. WSU, had a couple bad games, and they proceeded to clobber them 52-14. My happy dollar for the Cougars.
Steve Hall.
You're still
No,
muted.
I was just seconding Sam. So I guess that means I owe $1.
Yeah, you do. Tom, do you have something? Make sure you're unmuted, my friend.
You're still muted, Tom.
Let's hop over to Rhonda while Tom sorts it out. Rhonda, go ahead.
I just wanted to give a happy dollar to a local youth camp here in town called Camp Solomon Schechter. It's a Jewish youth camp that's been around for many, many years. And my synagogue donated a huge amount recently. So yesterday I got to go there for a ceremony to honor my synagogue. And it's just such I heard the stories from the board members of how it had impacted their lives and the being in camp. And it was just such a powerful time to hear those stories. So they sell out every year. So if you have any young people that are interested, it's just south of Olympia Airport. It's not very far away. It's where the old Trails End. They took over the old Trails End camp decades ago.
Thanks, Rhonda. John Halverson.
Yeah, just a reminder to go and vote.
Yes.
Charles and Derek and I are still ballot inspectors. And after a rip-roaring hot beginning and lots of, way ahead of what happened in 2018, it went off a cliff. And for the last 4 days, we now have dropped turnout lower than 2018.
No.
I don't know what's going on, but it was disturbing to me, at least. So for those of you who are waiting for the last day, please don't wait, get it in so you don't forget. So everybody vote, please.
Especially
Thanks,
this
Tom.
election. We got some Hummers.
Marla, what you got?
I want to put in 10 happy dollars for hospice and encourage people to encourage their friends, the families of people who are in the process of dying to get them on hospice, because it helps not only the patient, but the families. And it was a hospice nurse who convinced me finally, after months, to talk to a professional and get on some antidepressants the first time in my life. And I think that hospice saved my life back then when my mother died. And I'm just very grateful. So I encourage people to tell their friends and family members to get their folks on hospice when it comes that time. It's very, very helpful.
Thank you, Marla.
Thank you, Marla. Thank you for sharing that. I think I saw Mark Johnson's hand up. Is that true?
I was just giving a thumbs up, but thank you.
Well, thanks, everybody. This has been a really wonderful meeting. Like I said, I recorded it, so I'll let Charles know when the recording is ready so that people can access it. Julie, thank you so, so much for this really, really important topic.
Excellent.
We're so grateful. Really, really.
We're
Okay.
sending you love, Marla.
All right. Take care, everybody. Have a great week.